however difficult you find it, there are tools and techniques and ways to help you think more clearly about the future.
The challenge there is a little bit to...
So our minds like a little bit of novelty, but we have a psychological allergy to uncertainty.
Dr. Graham Norris is an organizational psychologist, futurist, and sought-after advisor who specializes in helping decision makers navigate uncertainty. His TEDx talk, Be More Futurist, has received over 50,000 views. If you want to learn from someone who understands both human behavior and strategic decision-making, this is the conversation you don't want to miss. With a background in psychology, strategic foresight, and organizational behavior, Graham has worked with executives, teams, and entire organizations to shift their mindset towards the future. His work is grounded in cutting-edge psychological research, making him a rare foresight expert who blends psychological insights with real-world applications. We'll dive into the difficulties of thinking about what's coming next and how we can break through our mental barriers. We'll explore why our brains are wired to focus on the present, how emotional triggers keep us stuck in the now, and what psychological barriers make long-term thinking such a struggle. But it doesn't end there. We'll also unpack 3 powerful strategies to overcome these hurdles. Strategies that can shift your mindset and help you prepare for multiple futures, not just predict one. This conversation is packed with insights that will change the way you think about the future. So Graham, thanks very much for taking the time. It's a pleasure to talk to you, particularly because I've been grappling with the aspect of psychology and foresight for quite some time, because the future happens in our head. Future doesn't exist. So in my mind, psychology is really important. I'm really interested to talking to you to find a little bit what the connection is between psychology and futures thinking and foresight.
Sure. Well, thanks very much for inviting me, Jan. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
The first question really goes into the aspect of psychology and foresight. So how important is psychology when we think about the future, and how can we maybe use that to our advantage?
The most important thing we do every day is make decisions, and all decisions are about the future. And so the more productively we can think about the future, the better decisions we can make. And that's not always that easy, because in simpler times, the decisions that we had to make were pretty limited, and there was only a limited amount of information we could get. And so it was not too hard. And now, of course, we're expected to make decisions that extend much further into the future, and we can feel the impacts of those decisions much further down the line. And so it's much more challenging for us to think that far ahead. And one psychological concept that I often come back to, that your listeners or readers might find useful, it has a little bit of a complicated name, so I just call it the Magoo effect. Mr. Magoo was a cartoon character who could see things right in front of him, see things right in front of his face, but he couldn't see anything further away, and he used to get in all kinds of trouble because he couldn't see very well. And so if you think about maybe a street near your home in your hometown, maybe not one you don't go to very often, but you should be able to conjure up, a pretty vivid image of that street relatively easily. And then if I ask you about a street in another town, well, maybe that will be a little bit more difficult. And maybe a street in another city in another country will be more challenging still. And if I go to a different continent, then you're going to find it much more difficult. Well, it's the same when we think about time. So things close to us in terms of time are much easier to think about, much easier to conceive. And so things in the present or the very short-term future, the ultra short-term future, seem concrete, real, and important. But when we think about things further away in time, more deeply into the future, they seem more abstract, less tangible, even less relevant to us. That's why it becomes more of a challenge for us to think more deeply into the future.
So how can we outsmart our inner Magoo? Here are 3 simple strategies. Zoom out intentionally. Use tools like futures thinking to paint vivid pictures of what could happen. The more specific you get, the less blurry it becomes. And Graham will talk about this in a little bit. Connect emotionally. Don't just think about what might happen. Imagine who will be affected: your kids, your community, your future self. Chunk the time. Break the future into stepping stones. 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. Suddenly, the future isn't some vague blob. It's a series of moments you can actually plan for. So the next time you're stuck in a tough decision, ask yourself, am I thinking like Mr. Magoo, only seeing what's right in front of me? Or am I lifting my gaze, imagining the road ahead? To remind myself of this, I'll hang a picture of Mr. Magoo in my office so I can see it every day.
We actually spend most of our cognitive firepower thinking about the next few seconds. So we're always predicting, but it's very, very, very short term. And so even our conversation, your mind is subconsciously trying to predict what I'm going to say next. And if I drop in an unusual penguin or something word, then you'll be like, oh, hang on, there's something going wrong there. That doesn't fit in with my range of prediction. No, even if we think about tomorrow, in fact, we normally have to look at our calendars to really think through what's going to happen. Let alone, yeah, as you say, next week or next month or next year. And so we are really primed to be thinking just very, very in the ultra short term moment. And I think that makes a huge difference about how we try to think about the future when we try to escape that.
So why does this matter? Because if your brain is only tuned into the now, then long-term decisions, they feel abstract, distant, easy to delay, easy to ignore. Want to save for retirement? Start a new career? Make climate-conscious choices? Those things live in the blurry part of your brain's timeline, and your mental autopilot wants nothing to do with them. But can we train ourselves to think more ahead, or to have more of a futures mindset? Is that something that we can work on?
So there are push factors repelling us from thinking about the future and pull factors that are dragging us into the present. And once we can understand those, then we can understand the techniques that can actually help us overcome those. So in terms of push factors, I think really the most important is uncertainty. And I describe our relationship with uncertainty is that we have a psychological allergy to uncertainty. So our minds like a little bit of novelty, but too much change, we don't really want to deal with it. And there's a study by the University College London that looked at just the physiological impact, so the impact on our bodies of uncertainty. And what they did was they got the participants to play a game, and if they got it wrong, then they would get an electric shock. And so this was the element of uncertainty. And what they did was they rigged the game, of course, because that's what you do with experiments. And so some people could learn the game to avoid getting electric shocks. Some people, no matter what they did, they were going to get electric shocks. And for other people, it was kind of random. It was about 50-50 that might get a shock or not. And they discovered that it was more stressful to not know if you were going to get a shock or not than to actually know you were going to get one. So we have this kind of perverse comfort in the certainty of knowing what will happen, even when we know it's going to be uncomfortable. And so this is the push factor that repels us from thinking about the future. The pull factors, and there's lots of them, but one example is hot stimuli. So hot stimuli are anything that engages our hot cognitive processes. So it could be anger or hunger or sexual stimulation. And those kinds of stimuli will drag our attention into the short term. They demonstrate that when you engage someone's hot cognitive systems, then we basically stop thinking about the future. We discount the future more, and we place much more emphasis and much more financial value on the here and now and the ultra short term. And so really the trick is to use techniques to try to break free, get some velocity to escape velocity to break free of the short term, so that we can cast our minds into the future and really understand the possibilities of what might be outside of our control, but also how we can influence that as well.
So when we are triggered emotionally, our ability to value the future plummets. We'll make worse decisions, spend more money, and prioritize whatever gives us relief right now. Sound familiar? Let's face it, the future is fuzzy, unknown, sometimes scary. But it's also where every important decision leads to. And if we don't learn how to sit with that discomfort, to look ahead even when it's hard, we'll keep trading what we really want for what feels good right now. And we deserve better than that. And yet I get it. There's often this quiet resistance, this feeling of, what's the point? I can't change anything anyway. The future's already written. Or maybe it just feels too far away, too abstract to even imagine yourself in it. But here's the good news. You can do something concrete. You don't need a crystal ball. You just need a place to start. And there sometimes is resistant to kind of say, well, I can't change anything anyways. The future is how it is, and they can't project themselves that far into the future. Is there something concrete that I could do, for example?
There are really three maybe strategies I would think in particular that people can do to cultivate a more futures oriented kind of mindset. So I think one of them, and I've seen it in your videos actually, is talking about scenarios, but scenario thinking. To do this, I often give the example when we're talking about the looking at the future, is we often think about, okay, we're looking for a crystal ball. And so by we're looking at a crystal ball, we're looking to see exactly what's going to happen because we want to have this prediction. We want to be right. But actually, what we should really be doing instead is to be using a prism. Because a prism, when you shine a light through it, it refracts the light and then splits it up into its component parts. So you see not just a single kind of light, a white light, but you actually see all its components. And by doing that, you can see maybe some lights, some colors are brighter than others, or you can look at the quality of the color and everything else. If you get into the habit of thinking in terms of scenarios, then you'll have a much better understanding about what could happen. You're going to have more confidence because you've thought about all the possibilities and you haven't tricked yourself into saying, okay, I know what's going to happen. So, for example, you talk to people about the future of their business or their company, and they may say, well, interest rates are going to be important down the road because we have a lot of debt. So if we, instead of saying, okay, well, I think the interest rates are going to be 3.5% or whatever it is in next year, we can actually say, well, what if the interest rate is 5%, or what if the interest rate is 2%, or what if the interest rate is something else, or the level of inflation, or whatever it could be. So then we break free of this need to make predictions. So this is one way, I think, to help think a little bit more clearly about the future. And another way is to think in terms of probabilities. So when we create these scenarios, we can actually attach probabilities to them so that we can say, well, the chances of Trump having tariffs on something or other on cars this time next year is going to be X%. And then we can accept about the uncertainties. This is really accepting and acknowledging the uncertainties of the future because we put probabilities against it. The probabilities are also never going to be correct. But we're not looking to be right. We're just looking to break free of that very linear, singular view of the future that we naturally want to try to attach our decision making to, which works in the ultra short term, but doesn't in the longer term. And I think the third thing that can be useful is thinking in terms of ranges, breaking free of this idea of having a singular view of the future and having a range instead. And if you play poker at all, you'll be familiar with the concept of talking about the ranges of hands that your opponents might have. And then looking at the probabilities that, given the ranges of hands they might have, how you might win. And you may look at interest rates instead of trying to predict an exact interest rate. Well, say the interest rate, I'm pretty confident the interest rate is going to be in a certain range. And you can still have more confidence in your understanding about the future. So those are just sort of three ways I think we can try to think more confidently about the future.
Why does this work? Graham mentioned earlier that our brains love certainty, even false certainty. Scenario thinking short circuits that. It activates divergent thinking, the same kind of thinking used in creativity and innovation. And when you assign probabilities, you're shifting from gut feeling to strategic reasoning. So you're not guessing, you're adapting. But you do need to get more comfortable being in that weird, blurry space between I know and I have no idea. That's what makes you resilient.
One of the biggest challenges when you get people in a room and you ask them to start thinking about the future is you'll get quite a range. Some people get it straight away, but most people find that quite difficult because we live in a sort of very predictable cycles and we follow these ruts and these habits. And to break free of that mentally is very, very challenging. And to get people to think about futures that look different from today is hard because today is so vivid and so vibrant and seems so important and so real. To then try to treat the future in the same way when you've got this Magoo effect, when it's so fuzzy and hazy, is actually very, very challenging indeed for the vast majority of people. And I'd say it takes hours to actually massage their brains, their minds, to be able to let go of all of these very established ways of predicting and thinking about things so that they can actually properly cast their minds into the future and conceive of things that are different from today.
It actually takes mental effort, even hours, to loosen those ruts and imagine futures that look different from today. So if you've ever tried to do this kind of thinking and felt stuck, you're not alone. And that's why this work matters. It's not about being right. It's about becoming more flexible, more curious, and just a little bit more free from the gravity of the now.
I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of counterfactual thinking about situations that are sort of parallel but different from where we are now, which is often a little bit easier for people. So that we're still in the present. It's just an alternative present, so it doesn't feel quite as menacing as trying to think about different futures, where it starts to get. Sometimes people get overwhelmed by the whole concept. They're like, it's just too big. It's just too complex, and they don't really want to go there. So yeah, so I understand the challenge about tying it back into to where you're going to be heading next in terms of the future, because you do risk leaving people behind, and you really want to take people as far along the journey as you can.
So for our viewers or listeners, if there was one thing that they could do to try and think more proactively about the futures, what could that be? Do you have a suggestion?
The way even our companies are structured is very much process oriented, and so you're almost kind of following the instructions every day, and working through to-do lists, and that's all where we're most comfortable. So to get people to escape that is really quite challenging. The one thing I would say is, when someone asks you a question, what do you think is going to happen? And you can try this with anybody, and maybe you try it on someone else first. Almost guaranteed they're going to give you just a single possibility in reply, because this is naturally what we do. Everybody's looking for predictions. Everybody's trying to make predictions. It doesn't matter how far into the future you're going to go, or how implausible actually having a prediction about that far ahead is. We will still do it that way. And so you can try asking someone a question and then give your own response as well. And when you do that, give two possibilities, saying it could be this or it could be that. Now, some people won't like that. they want a prediction. So, for example, last year, someone asked me, "Oh, do you think China's going to invade Taiwan?" And naturally, I'd be saying, "Well, this or that." But what I actually did was, well, that's one possibility, and they may do it this way. Another possibility is they don't, and they hang back. And another possibility is there's maybe they just use missiles and then try to force a negotiation. Another possibility is maybe they just close off all the ports and they have a like siege of Taiwan. And then you can attach probabilities to all of those with a time frame, of course. And then just by doing that, you will have realized you've opened up your mind to understanding all of those different possibilities. You started thinking about what kind of signals are going to indicate that one of those possibilities is happening. And also by thinking about all of them, and this is the most important thing a lot of people don't realize about the benefits of scenarios, is you can identify the commonalities. So no matter which scenario happens, there may be something that's going to be true anyway. And so by doing that, you can really get the full benefit of thinking in terms of scenarios. And it doesn't have to be hard, right? Just to do that in a few sentences can be quite easy. If you start doing that on a regular basis, it can really start changing the way you think about things.
And that means that you have to reframe the question. Because if I remember right, the question that you were asked was, when will China invade Taiwan, or will they invade Taiwan? So
yeah,
you have to reframe it and say, well, how will the relationship between China and Taiwan develop over the next 10, 15 years?
exactly. And I think that's the first step, is to say, well, when are you talking about? Are you talking about next week or next month or next year or ever? I mean, because once again, they're very, very different. And I think this is another thing people do, is they'll say never or definitely. And of course, it really depends on the time frame. And that is often the trickiest part to nail down.
How can we sort of shift a team mindset towards the future?
Yeah, one of the best tools I've seen regard to how teams think about the future is actually the 3 horizons. And I've seen you talk about 3 horizons in one of your videos there. Now, 3 horizons really has 2 aspects to it. One is as a tool for us to think about the future, but the other is as a tool to understand different perspectives on thinking about the future. And so just for those who aren't familiar with it, there are the 3 perspectives. There's the managerial perspective, which is really about the here and now, maintaining the status quo, understanding what's happening right now and kind of maintaining that. And then there's a visionary perspective, which talks about completely changing the way things are done. So completely overhauling that industry or sector or whatever it is, and creating a completely new paradigm. And then in between, there's an entrepreneurial mindset, which is thinking about, okay, what kind of change can we make that will be useful? And that may be in service of creating that visionary future, but it could also be maintaining the current one, an iteration. And I often think about electric cars as a good example of this. So electric cars could be seen as a sort of revolutionary way of thinking about cars, and saying, because it's a completely different way of propelling cars along. You don't need an internal combustion engine. The whole drive chain is different. The way you source the energy is completely different, and everything else. So you could see a visionary future being, all electric vehicles and what have you. But you could also say that electric vehicles are really enforcing the status quo of having private transport. So that actually we're reinforcing the idea of a car as being a primary mode of transport for a lot of people, as opposed to other kinds of maybe public transport. And so we have these different perspectives on the future. And when you get people in a room, you'll almost certainly have people who have more of a managerial, an entrepreneurial, or a visionary mindset when it comes to the future. And the important thing that Bill Sharp points out when it comes to bringing people together is there's no right answer here, or there's no right perspective or wrong perspective, because they all complement each other. Because the visionary, yes, can give people hope that we can have a better future, but they also need the managerial perspective to give a sense of tradition or continuity or heritage, so that we can, which is also important when we're trying to make progress with our organizations. And then, of course, the entrepreneurial mindset is one that maybe can give something more practical to the way we're going to move forward. And so I often, when I work with groups, I often give them an assessment so that we can start to surface some of those different perspectives, because I think it's important when we're talking to each other that we really do understand that there are different perspectives. We're likely to be coming at issues from different viewpoints.
What I love about this take is that it shifts the three horizons from just a timeline into a mirror, one that reveals how we think, how we prioritize, and how we sometimes talk past each other. It's not just a tool for mapping change, it's a tool for mapping mindset. And once you see that, you stop asking who's right, and you start asking, what are we missing if we only think from one horizon? Obviously, there are different types, both personality types, but also types in terms of mindsets towards the future. I use a Polak game, so I get them to spread out on a line to identify or to answer certain questions. So how far into the future do they plan? Can they shape? Do they think that we can shape the future, or are we sort of just reacting to future developments? And to discuss some of these questions as well. I've done this for some of my students, but I've also done this in workshops. And this works quite well, as you said, to demonstrate that there are different ways of thinking, and one is not necessarily better than the other, and to use all these different perspectives and coming up with solutions.
I think you touched on what I think is one of the most important character or personality traits, which is the internal locus of control. So that idea that we actually have agency, and it's not just the world happens to us, as we have some control, and that is really through our decisions. And I really do emphasize that, because for some people it can feel like change is happening to them, particularly in organizations where there's a lot of constant transformations. And I always try to emphasize, well, okay, some things may be out of your control, but what is within your control? What are the decisions you're going to be making? Because no matter who you are in the world, you have limitations on what you can influence, and so you just have to focus on the decisions that you can make.
Here's where it gets even more interesting. The idea of agency is not just a fluffy motivational concept. It's actually something deeply rooted in our psychology. Studies show that when people recognize they have control over their decisions, they tend to experience lower levels of stress and higher levels of motivation. The moment you realize you're not at the mercy of circumstances, something shifts. You start taking responsibility for where you're headed. In my experience, the most successful teams, the ones who thrive through change, are the ones who recognize that they are the authors of their own futures. They're the ones who don't wait for the next big shift to dictate what happens next, they're actively shaping that next step through their decisions. Now, that doesn't mean you can control everything. We all know that, right? But here's the important distinction. What you can control, you should take full responsibility for. Even if changes around you feel overwhelming, you have the ability to choose your attitude, your approach, and your response.
I think it's important. It is important to get people to think in different ways because we have imaginations,
Hmm.
right? Most animals just operate purely on instinct. That some of them show some tendency to have a little bit of imagination, but in general, they operate largely on instinct, and we as animals also tend to operate largely on instinct. But what makes us special is the fact we have imaginations. We can conceive of futures that are different from today, and then cooperate on making them happen. This is how we make massive buildings and cities and all the wonders of the world.
Yeah, but unfortunately, we've lost a little bit of that imagination as we grew up. It's sort of beaten out of us, in inverted commas, of course.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's trying to get that child mind like again to kind of think on a white piece of paper without sort of strings pulling us back into reality. That's a bit of the challenge. Yeah. So if I'm a leader in a company, I have my team, and I would like my team to think a little bit more about future possibilities. How can I approach that?
I often talk about the importance of vision when it comes to all levels of an organization. In fact, if we think about the top of the organization, they should have a vision statement, right? Or they should have some kind of vision.
Mm.
And so, ideally, the organization and the leader, whatever level we're at, has a vision about what they want to achieve and can tell that in terms of a story or a narrative of some description. And then we have at the bottom of the organization, we have the people, and they all have their own visions as well. And by helping them understand what their visions are, because they're not always that clear, even for us as individuals, and they change over time. But understanding what our dreams and aspirations, or whatever other word you like to use, our purpose, understanding what those are is important, particularly as they relate to the organization. And then, most importantly, that part in the middle about how the team comes together and what kind of vision the team has. And I think that's the bit that is often missing, is the team vision, because the team vision shouldn't be just like a trickle down thing. It should actually incorporate the visions of the people within the team as well as the organizational vision as well. And so that's what really holds the this sort of pyramid together, is the fact that it's each level of vision is incorporating everybody else's vision as well.
And how about sort of thinking about future possibilities? So I understand the whole aspect of visioning and then doing backcasting to see how we can achieve that vision. But how about changes that could affect maybe our day-to-day operations or our vision? Um, is there something that I as leader can do to kind of open up my team towards different future possibilities?
One thing I think is to help color in the future. So rather than just tell people what's going to happen and why, which a lot of people would say, well, I've told you why, right? That
Mhm.
should be good enough, right? But it's not good enough, because you haven't taken people to the better place that
Mhm.
you want to end up. And if you can then take people to that place and understand what those good intentions are, then they're much more likely to buy into that. That's all you need, right? That's all you need
Yeah.
to open the door and then get people to walk through. And if they walk out again, okay, so be it. But you just need to open the door and get them to walk through.
So yeah, I'm a leader, and I want to lead with foresight. But what makes me a good leader with foresight? How can I position myself?
Making sure to connect whatever we're doing today with the purpose,
Mhm.
right? Because even I've been in positions where sometimes I'm asking people to do things, and even in my own heart, I'm like, is this actually worthwhile, or am I just doing this because someone else asked me to do it, and it's not actually getting us anywhere useful? And so I think being able to critically test all of your activities and everything on your to-do list, and the to-do list of all the people in your team, and say, okay, how is this going to move us forward? And is there something else on your to-do list or something else we could do which would move us forward more quickly and more effectively? So that's one thing. I think the other thing is to actually look back and to say, okay, well, we've been working for a while now. How far have we come? Do you remember the vision that we had before, and where we were before, and how far we've come? There's a book by Dan Sullivan and someone else, I've forgotten their name, but it's called The Gap and the Gain. And we can focus a lot on the gap, at where we are between where we are now and where we want to be. But we also need to spend quite a bit of time thinking about the gain, how we've come, because that's our momentum. And if we ignore the momentum, then we're always going to be pushing the rock up the hill. But we already have made a lot of progress, and to have that momentum to keep pushing on to where we want to end up, I think is also very, very important. We do have to sort of stop for a moment and smell the roses and enjoy where we are and enjoy how far we've come and appreciate the past, as well as what we've learned from it, in order to be able to press on to achieve whatever ambitions we want to achieve. So I'm a great believer that everybody has a futurist within them. So even those people who really struggle to conceive of futures that are different from today, however difficult you find it, there are tools and techniques and ways to help you think more clearly about the future. And so if I can help people think another year, another month, another week, even another minute into the future, if you can achieve that, then you're going to make better decisions. So I'd say whatever effort you can put in, you will definitely get the benefits from it.
Excellent. And you've done a TEDx talk on just that. So go and watch that. And of course, go watch all my videos as well, because I try, that's something I share with Graham, trying to get everyone to think more about the future. Graham, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. I really enjoyed it.
We've covered a lot today. How vision drives action, how leadership with foresight isn't just about making decisions for today, but creating a meaningful path for tomorrow, and how understanding and aligning with your team's aspirations can shape a more impactful future. But the real power lies in action. It's not enough to just understand these concepts. We have to apply them, challenge our assumptions, and ask ourselves every day, what decision today will move us closer to a vision for tomorrow? As we've seen, fostering foresight in ourselves and our teams isn't just about predicting the future, it's about actively shaping it. Whether it's transforming meetings, creating team visions, or rethinking how we approach our daily tasks, it all comes down to the choices we make and the culture we create within our organizations. So here's my challenge to you. Think about your vision for the future, both personally and professionally. What changes can you make today to move closer to that vision? Is there a team member who needs to be empowered, or a daily habit that needs to be restructured? Take that step and share it with us. If this conversation sparked something in you, don't just leave it here. Take action. Hit that subscribe button for more content like this, and share this video with someone who could benefit from these insights. And of course, leave us a comment below. Let's continue this conversation and explore how we can all lead with foresight and make decisions that matter. Thank you for joining us today.